Today we're bringing you a gripping political thriller rooted in courage, sacrifice, and the unshakable pursuit of truth. So sit back, lean in, and get ready to witness what happens when one woman dares to challenge the system from the inside out. You won't just hear a story, you'll feel the fire behind it. Thank you for being the kind of audience that still believes truth matters. The rain came down in sheets as Pam Bondi stepped out of her car onto the gravel driveway of Falcon Ridge Estate, a crumbling mansion buried deep in the woods of Savannah, Georgia. The estate hadn't seen a political fundraiser in years, not since its former owner disappeared from public view, leaving behind nothing but silence and suspicion. Tonight, there were no cameras, no reporters, no aides. Just the hum of cicadas, the sharp scent of wet pine, and a light glowing faintly behind a second-floor window. Bondi didn't need a key. The door was already ajar, creaking open into a grand foyer cloaked in dust and history. At the far end of the room, near a fire that hadn't quite warmed the space, stood Raiden Morrow, retired general, war hero, and the man rumored to have pulled strings even presidents couldn't see. He said nothing at first, just handed her a matte black briefcase and nodded once. "It's all in there," he said quietly, eyes locked on hers. "No summaries, no filters, just the truth." She opened the latch slowly, revealing rows of documents, encrypted flash drives, and something more chilling, a draft executive order tucked into a sealed envelope. "Why me?" she asked. Morrow's voice didn't flinch. "Because you've already lost enough to not be afraid of losing more." Thunder cracked above them. Bondi closed the case, her grip tightening. She didn't ask for more details. She didn't need to. Whatever this was, it wasn't political anymore. It was something older, something buried, and now it was hers to unearth. As she turned to leave, Morrow added one final line. "Don't try to warn them, just act. The window's already closing." She walked back into the storm with fire in her chest and history in her hands. The lodge was quiet. Too quiet. Tucked beside a fog-covered lake in Asheville, North Carolina, it was the kind of place designed for disappearances. No front desk, no nosy staff, just a key under a rock and a fireplace that hadn't been lit in months. Pam Bondi laid the black briefcase on the bed, her movements deliberate, her breathing slower now, measured. Outside, the wind swept across the lake like a warning. Inside, she opened the case again, not like before, not as a recipient, but as a prosecutor. The documents were bundled tightly, no titles, no summaries, just raw intelligence. She spread them across the bedspread, photocopies of surveillance requests, internal memos with names she recognized from headlines, and digital forensics charts so detailed they looked like schematics for an invisible war. Then she saw it, the draft executive order, stamped preliminary, do not distribute. It proposed a sweeping change requiring proof of citizenship for all federal elections, with funding penalties for non-compliant states. That alone would have sparked outrage. But what surrounded it, the why, embedded in metadata and cross-referenced memos, was the real bombshell. Bondi reached for one of the USB drives. Plugged into her offline laptop, it revealed a folder tree, FISA/2016, Fusion Logs, ChainCom, Project Mirror. She opened FISA/2016 and hit play on the first audio file. Static, then a voice. Controlled, confident. "We don't need verification, we need urgency. Push it through." A second voice chimed in, reluctantly agreeing. The names were redacted, but Bondi knew the tone. These weren't people rushing to protect the country. They were manufacturing consent. Another file contained internal emails between operatives and campaign officials. One line in particular froze her hand. "Get it into the pipeline. Steele says the channel's already greased." She kept reading. The Steele dossier, still unverified, was used anyway. Memos showed agents voicing concern only to be told to stand down for narrative continuity. Bondi flipped to a log entry dated October 28, 2016. The line read, "None of Steele's sources verified, proceeding under urgency clause." She leaned back. It was worse than political, it was systemic. They didn't just mislead the public, they bypassed their own safeguards to do it. Patterns emerged. not of confusion, but of orchestration. Words like useful fiction, optical buffer, and press ready popped up again and again. The deeper she read, the clearer it became. This wasn't negligence, it was choreography. Pam Bondi wasn't prone to paranoia, but this wasn't a rabbit hole, it was a tunnel, deliberately built, deliberately buried, and now she was standing at the mouth of it, holding the blueprints. She picked up her pen, opened a fresh legal pad, and wrote one word at the top of the page: intent. This wasn't about careless oversight, it was about what they meant to do. She didn't know yet how deep it went, but she knew this: if even half of it held up in court, it would shake the foundation of the institutions that claim to protect democracy, and she would be the one to light the fuse. 2 days after Bondi began unraveling the documents, she initiated the next step, one she'd been dreading as much as anticipating. She couldn't do this alone. The legal gravity, the layers of jurisdiction, the sheer volume of evidence. This would take more than a sharp mind, it would take a circle of absolute trust. She made 3 encrypted calls, each under 2 minutes. No names, no summaries. Just a location and a time. The next night, in a decommissioned law library in the basement of a closed university building in Raleigh, North Carolina, 3 people arrived. No handshakes, no pleasantries, just eyes scanning for surveillance and ears tuned for silence. Vivian Cross was first former NSA cybersecurity chief who walked away from the agency after exposing unauthorized data sweeps on American citizens. Her exit was quiet, but her reputation among insiders was anything but. She sat with her back to the wall, already decrypting one of the drives Bondi brought. "You weren't kidding," she muttered, eyebrows knitting as lines of code flickered across her screen. They didn't even try to cover the metadata. Next came Jules Kincaid, a constitutional lawyer who'd helped rewrite sections of the FISA framework post 9/11, but had since grown disillusioned with how it was exploited. "They bent every oversight rule to fit a story," he said after 20 minutes of flipping through files. "This wasn't sloppy, it was strategic." Finally, Silas Vance entered. Once an award-winning journalist, now a back-channel broker who traded information between whistleblowers, law firms, and the occasional rogue operative. He didn't speak for the first hour, just read, listened, then quietly slid a printed thread of burner phone messages toward Bondi. Direct communication between a Fusion-linked operative and a sitting Intelligence Committee aide. It read, "We'll clean it before it reaches oversight. Tell the Hill staffers not to panic." Bondi sat at the head of the table, listening as they debated the chain of custody, the probable admissibility in court, and most critically, the blowback. Vivian warned that once these files were traced back to her decryption node, she'd lose her federal clearance permanently. Jules reminded everyone that taking this to court would mean confronting not just partisan media, but career DOJ officials who'd built their reputations on the very cases this evidence would discredit. Silas said nothing until the end. Then he looked at Bondi and said, "You're not filing a case. You're exposing a structure. They won't respond with arguments. They'll respond with annihilation." Pam didn't flinch. "Then let's build something they can't twist." She unrolled a printed legal timeline, her version of a roadmap. Everyone leaned in. No leaks, no press, no podiums. This would move like a ghost, one citation at a time. And when the curtain finally lifted, it wouldn't be to reveal a conspiracy theory, it would be to reveal proof. That night, as the files were copied to cold storage and burner phones handed out, the circle was formed, not of idealists, but of people with nothing left to lose. And that made them dangerous. By the end of the week, the machine stirred. Not the judicial one, that would come later. This was the other machine, the one built on headlines, narrative control, and 100 anonymous sources with Ivy League emails. Pam Bondi had filed 3 quiet subpoenas through a district judge known for constitutional rigor. The filings didn't use explosive language, no accusations, no conclusions, just cold documentation and a request for digital traceability. But someone had been watching. Within 24 hours, a prominent DC columnist published a speculative op-ed titled, "Pam Bondi's New Crusade, a Legal Witch Hunt in Designer Heels." It was followed by a CNN segment analyzing The Risk of Weaponizing Declassified Intelligence, featuring 3 former DOJ officials, all of whom had at one point worked on the very cases under scrutiny. Bondi said nothing. She remained cloistered inside a temporary war room in D.C., a rented corporate suite converted into a fortress of evidence, corkboards, subpoena logs, and annotated memos. But even silence became ammunition. MSNBC ran a story citing Bondi's disturbing silence in the face of mounting concern. The irony almost made her laugh. Almost. Outside her building, the first wave of protesters arrived, small, scattered, but loud. A few held up signs calling her a MAGA relic. Others branded her a traitor to democracy. She recognized the tactic: isolate, discredit, dismantle. But she wasn't the only target anymore. Natalie Winters had posted a quiet thread on X, no tags, no caps, just a series of screenshots showing communication logs between Fusion-linked intermediaries and senior campaign staff. Her receipts were airtight, but the response was immediate and vicious. Within hours, a heavily edited video clip circulated suggesting Natalie had endorsed political violence during a past interview. She hadn't. But the timing didn't matter. The clip aired on 2 major networks before she even knew it existed. Her inbox exploded with hate. Photos of her apartment surfaced on Reddit. An article labeled her the new face of neo-authoritarian journalism. Pam called her immediately. "They're not just trying to discredit you," she said. "They're trying to define you before the truth can." Natalie's voice was calm, almost too calm. "Good. That means we hit a nerve." Pam warned her that once committee involvement was confirmed, the smear campaigns would intensify. Natalie just replied, "Let them come. Facts don't blink." Meanwhile, Silas intercepted chatter on encrypted platforms, suggesting a coordinated PR hit was in motion. One aimed at Bondi's bar license, her digital history, even her family. Jules received word from an old contact inside the DOJ. Several internal briefings had begun referring to Bondi's filings as potentially seditious. Vivian's name was flagged in a classified oversight log. Quiet pressure was being applied across the board. And yet, public interest surged. Independent legal blogs began dissecting the subpoenas. Podcasts with no corporate ties started raising the question, if Bondi's claims are baseless, why are they trying so hard to shut her up? A slow drip of public awareness began to form. Not loud, not viral, but steady. Bondi knew they couldn't win the public yet, but they could earn suspicion. That was enough. She pinned a note to the wall above her case files in thick, red ink. Truth doesn't need to go viral, it needs to survive the fire. The backlash had begun, but it was doing something unexpected. It wasn't stopping her. It was sharpening her. The smear campaign didn't arrive like a tidal wave. It slithered in like smoke. There were no official denials, no press conferences refuting the documents. Instead, the attack was personal, psychological, and relentless. It started with a strategically leaked memo, circulated among Beltway insiders, questioning Pam Bondi's emotional stability and suggesting that personal grievances may be influencing her legal actions. By the time it reached a morning cable panel, the phrase had morphed into something more sinister. Unstable ideologue with a vendetta. Bondi didn't respond. Not in the press, not on social media. That silence only fueled the spin. Anchors began speculating, why won't she defend herself? What is she hiding? Within a day, a respected law journal published an op-ed arguing that Bondi's access to declassified material might constitute an ethics violation. The author? A former colleague, now a senior partner at a firm with direct ties to one of the exposed campaigns. The narrative was clear: destroy her credibility before the evidence could speak for itself. Natalie Winters fared no better. A fabricated email chain began circulating on political forums, suggesting she had coordinated with foreign actors to destabilize democratic institutions. The source? A low-resolution screenshot with metadata that didn't hold up under scrutiny. But that didn't matter. Within hours, pundits were citing it as fact. One network ran a 7-minute exposé titled "The Dangerous Rise of Data-Driven Disinformation." Natalie's photo was splashed across the screen. Her college thesis, an analysis of government transparency in the digital age, was now being dissected as proof of radical leanings. Pam tried to shield her team. She offered Natalie temporary housing. She called in favors to reroute Vivian's online trace. She kept Jules' name out of every filing, but the machine didn't care. It came anyway. A clip surfaced from a decade-old interview in which Jules had criticized the Patriot Act. Headlines read, "FISA critic now undermining national security. Silas received a cease and desist letter from a firm connected to one of the compromised officials, threatening litigation for information trafficking." Inside the war room, Bondi printed out each attack. She didn't hang them in anger. She filed them under a folder labeled "Attempts to Discredit." Each page told her one thing: they were afraid. They didn't counter the claims because they couldn't. They attacked the messengers instead. And for every hit piece, every baseless accusation, something else happened. More people started paying attention. Bondi noticed independent writers posting side-by-side comparisons of the media narrative versus the raw documents she'd filed. Natalie's X thread, despite the attacks, had been bookmarked by 500,000 users. It wasn't just echo chambers anymore. Something was breaking through. Then came the final shot across the bow. An anonymous leak to a major outlet claimed that Bondi herself was under federal investigation for misuse of classified materials. No source, no citation, just a headline and an ominous byline. That night, Bondi sat alone in her apartment, eyes scanning the screen. She didn't panic, she printed it, highlighted the date, wrote in the margin, "They blinked first." She turned to her legal pad and underlined one sentence she had written weeks earlier. The truth doesn't defend itself, it needs witnesses. And she realized the smear campaign had failed at its most important objective. It hadn't silenced them. It had only made them louder, sharper, and ready. The machine had played its hand. Now it was their turn. The hearing chamber at Capitol Hall felt more like a stage than a seat of justice. Polished oak desks, velvet-draped banners, and rows of water bottles lined up like props. Cameras were positioned for maximum coverage, and behind closed doors, talking points had already been distributed. But Pam Bondi hadn't come for theatrics. She came to detonate silence. When she stepped into the room, flanked by Natalie Winters and Jules Kincaid, every conversation dipped into a hush. Across the dais sat Congressman Elias Warwick, the chairman of the Intelligence Oversight Committee and the public face of her opposition. He wore a measured smile, but his eyes were calculating. He was ready to brand her a conspiracy theorist, a rogue ex officio seeking relevance. What he wasn't ready for was the evidence. The hearing opened predictably. Warwick began with a lecture disguised as a statement, framing Bondi's actions as selective leaks of misunderstood material, and warning that reckless use of sensitive information can destabilize institutions. Bondi didn't respond. Not yet. She waited until she was called forward, then stood without notes, without a prepared speech. Her tone was calm, deliberate. "Let's begin with the congressman's concern about context," she said, and clicked a remote. Behind her, a screen lit up, an internal memo from October 2016. Top line, "Steele dossier remains unverified." Murmurs spread across the room. She clicked again. An audio file began to play, grainy but clear. "Push it through. Warwick says oversight will approve retroactively." The room froze. Gasps. A pen clattered to the floor. Warwick's expression didn't change, but his posture did. Shoulders tighter, fingers clenched on the desk. He raised a hand. "That recording is taken out of context," he snapped. Bondi clicked again. A second voice followed. "We've told his staff it's unverifiable. He says that's not the point. Just keep the wheels turning." Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that chokes. Bondi let it hang. Then she spoke. "This isn't cherry-picked, it's verbatim." Next slide. Email chains between Fusion Link intermediaries and campaign aides. One read, "Use the friendly intel channel, avoid mainstream leak until narrative is seeded." Another, "Get Steele's material pre-cleared. We're not worried about accuracy, just timing." Bondi didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The documents did it for her. She transitioned smoothly into constitutional grounds, citing the procedural violations behind the FISA applications and the conscious suppression of internal dissent among field agents. This wasn't oversight failure, she said. It was coordination masked as urgency. Then Natalie took the floor. She hadn't been scheduled to speak, but the room didn't stop her. She walked to the front, placed a binder on the desk, and opened to a tab marked Contradictions. For 6 years, she said, you told the public there was verified evidence of foreign collusion. What these documents show is a decision to manufacture that narrative, not confirm it. She paused, flipping to another tab. Surveillance targets. Americans were monitored based on intelligence your own staff admitted was unverified. Not only was it unverifiable, it was politically sourced. Warwick stood, hands flat on the desk. You're undermining the credibility of our entire system. Natalie didn't flinch. No. I'm revealing what already did. She lifted a thumb drive. These files contain metadata logs, sender signatures, internal agency timestamps. If any are fake, prove it. If they're real, explain them. The room descended into quiet tension. Staffers whispered. Reporters texted frantically. Aides to other congressmen leaned into one another. Then Bondi pulled out the final slide. A still frame from a voter registration event in a California district. A sign that read, "No ID needed. Register here." Funded by a state program flagged in her documents. This isn't hearsay, she said. It's happening. And your silence has allowed it. By the time she returned to her seat, the hearing wasn't just about her case. It was about the institutions themselves. Warwick's smirk had vanished. Members of the committee glanced at one another, unsure whether they were witnessing an act of rebellion or the start of reckoning. And in that moment, for the first time since the backlash began, Pam Bondi knew. They weren't dismissing her anymore. They were listening. Because now, they had no choice. The fallout didn't wait for an official verdict. It erupted in real time. Within an hour of the hearing's live stream ending, the clip of Pam Bondi playing the audio of Congressman Warwick's staff greenlighting unverifiable intelligence had been viewed over 30 million times across platforms. Headlines scrambled to catch up. Legacy media outlets tried to reframe the hearing as dangerous disinformation, but something had shifted. This time, the public wasn't waiting to be told what to think. Independent analysts began publishing side-by-side comparisons of Bondi's evidence and official government timelines. The discrepancies weren't subtle, they were seismic. And the public wasn't the only one paying attention. That evening, the Department of Justice announced an internal inquiry into procedural misconduct related to several FISA applications, with 2 former intelligence officials placed on administrative leave pending review. The news broke during prime time. Network anchors tried to soften the language, but the crawl along the bottom of the screen said it plainly. Criminal referrals expected. In California, New Jersey, and Illinois, states named in Bondi's filing, governors went on defense. Press conferences were called. Election integrity is secure, they insisted. This is politically motivated. But behind the scenes, emergency meetings were held between state attorneys general and federal liaisons. A quiet panic began to surface. At least one state paused all non-citizen voter outreach programs. Another scubbed internal language from recent campaign funding documents. Meanwhile, Bondi's legal team issued a letter to the Congressional Ethics Committee requesting a formal inquiry into Congressman Warwick's role in suppressing internal whistleblower complaints. The same night, Fusion GPS's bank accounts were frozen pending a federal audit. Their legal counsel called it unconstitutional overreach, but the paper trail, now public, made that argument brittle. Inside Bondi's war room, the mood was focused, not celebratory. Natalie Winters was now under 24-hour protection after multiple threats were made against her in the wake of her testimony. Still, she kept working. "We're not done," she told Bondi, flipping through a new batch of emails flagged during metadata analysis. "This is just the smoke. The fire's deeper." Across the room, Vivian Cross ran digital tracebacks, confirming that several sources attacking Bondi online were linked to political PACs cited in the original documents. The machine hadn't stopped. It had simply morphed. The media pivoted quickly. Overnight, Bondi was no longer described as unhinged or rogue. Now she was divisive, controversial, and ironically, effective. Some headlines even conceded the documents appeared damaging, though they clung to questions about context. That didn't matter. The damage was done. Polling showed a sharp spike in public concern over intelligence agency integrity. A bipartisan group of senators issued a statement calling for an independent review of foreign surveillance abuses. And yet Bondi knew the most dangerous moment wasn't behind them. It was ahead. Because exposure was only step one, accountability would be a bloodier battle. They'd awakened something larger than politics. They'd cracked open the myth of institutional infallibility. Now, the system would fight back, not with facts, but with force. As Bondi stood before the whiteboard in her office, she didn't see a victory. She saw a fracture line stretching across the republic, one decision away from rupture. And as her team prepared for the next wave, legal challenges, subpoenas, calls for her disbarment, she didn't flinch. She looked to Natalie and said quietly, "We didn't break it. We just showed them where it's already broken." And outside, crowds gathered, not chanting, not rioting, just watching the Capitol under overcast skies, as if waiting for the truth to finish what it started. By the week's end, while headlines still burned and cable panels argued over optics, Pam Bondi made her move, not with a press tour or victory lap, but with structure. In a quiet announcement streamed from a modest room overlooking the Potomac, she launched Liberty Network, a grassroots legal defense and accountability initiative aimed not at elections, but at civic strongholds, school boards, courtrooms, community watchdogs. "This isn't about red or blue," she said. "It's about making sure the next citizen whistleblower doesn't have to walk through fire alone. No fanfare, no political endorsements, just a mission and a framework. No high-dollar donors, no glossy commercials. Just a woman with a war map and a refusal to let history repeat itself." Beside her, Natalie Winters stepped up and unveiled Truthline, a decentralized journalism platform designed to publish sourced, document-backed investigations free from corporate filters and government pressure. "I don't need a news desk," she said. "I need a firewall between facts and fiction." She raised the binder she'd carried into the hearing, now dog-eared and creased. This wasn't about going viral. It was about showing people where to look and giving them the receipts. She didn't promise objectivity, she promised honesty. And in a media ecosystem addicted to outrage, that alone made her dangerous. The media tried to ignore the launches, calling them partisan stunts or reactionary branding, but neither Bondi nor Winters responded. They didn't need to. Their inboxes were already filled with tips, testimonies, and quiet messages from state workers, election volunteers, and former agents. People who had seen things but never thought anyone would believe them. Now, they had somewhere to go. Somewhere that wouldn't sanitize their words or dilute their truth. The counterpunch wasn't a speech. It was infrastructure. It wasn't built for applause. It was built to last. Bondi knew the system would recover. It always did. But now it had to reckon with a public that was more alert, less trusting, and far more equipped. And she had no intention of stepping back. As she told her team before the announcement went live, "We didn't just expose a lie, we built the scaffolding for what comes next." Because the real fight wasn't over who got punished, it was over who stayed awake, and who refused to sleep ever again. The storm had passed, but the air still vibrated with aftershocks. A week after the hearing, Pam Bondi sat not in a courtroom or before a camera, but in the back row of a local school board meeting in Fairfax County, Virginia. No one recognized her at first, no blazer, no entourage, just a simple notebook and the quiet resolve of someone who'd walked through fire and chosen to keep walking. The room was filled with parents arguing over curriculum changes and budget proposals, unaware that one of the most watched women in America was sitting just feet away. And that was exactly how she wanted it. This wasn't about being seen, it was about reminding herself and others that the front lines aren't always in D.C. Sometimes they're in fluorescent lit rooms with folding chairs and microphones that barely work. She didn't speak that night. She just listened, watched, took notes. And when the meeting ended, she nodded at a young mother who had stood her ground, despite eye rolls from the board. That was the fight now. Ordinary, unglamorous, and absolutely vital. Later, as she stood by the window of her temporary office, the sun setting behind the Capitol dome, she reflected on how far they'd come. They had ripped the lid off something no one wanted to admit was real. But they hadn't burned it down. They'd held up a mirror. And now, the people had to decide what to do with the reflection. Natalie Winters had already boarded a train to the Midwest, her next investigation already in motion. Truthline had gone live, and within 48 hours its servers nearly crashed from traffic. Liberty Network had opened 10 field chapters, and though Bondi had offers, Senate endorsements, think tank proposals, even a book deal, she turned them all down. She didn't want power. She wanted people to understand it, to resist it when necessary, and to never let silence masquerade as stability again. Before leaving for the night, she scribbled one final note on her whiteboard, a message for anyone who might follow. Revolutions don't always wear boots. Sometimes they wear patience. The story of Pam Bondi and Natalie Winters is a powerful reminder that truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of clawing its way to the surface, but only if there are people brave enough to carry it. The real lesson isn't just about government overreach or media manipulation, it's about responsibility. Institutions can fail, narratives can be weaponized, but when individuals choose to stand firm, armed with facts, not fury, they become the firewall between justice and collapse. Pam didn't act to win headlines. Natalie didn't testify for fame. They acted because silence was no longer an option. The story teaches us that courage doesn't always look like defiance. It can look like discipline, like patience, like showing up to do the hard, thankless work of keeping the system honest. It also shows that real change doesn't begin on stages. It begins in war rooms and quiet resolve, in refusing to be intimidated. Truth needs more than voices. It needs defenders. And sometimes, those defenders won't be the loudest. They'll be the ones who refuse to look away. The ones who stay awake even when it's easier to sleep. Because democracy doesn't protect itself. People do.